So what was the conclusion of last week with grace and Doug couldn't remember what was the word that he used, not requirement, but reciprocity. Yeah. So what did you guys walk away with from that?
I missed last week.
Oh, okay. Well, me too.
It never occurred to me that was a reciprocal arrangement. He made the point that in some cultures, if you accept a gift from someone, they're going to show up at your door the next day, but reciprocity. And I never put that together with grace.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly how it was written in Ephesians that Paul meant it that way.
I had different, didn't jive with my thoughts on grace,
Yeah.
but everybody else seemed to.
Ah. Yeah, I just think it's such a fine line between, all right, you've received this, and so there's some kind of change, there's some kind of response compared to there's some kind of needed reciprocity.
For that, yeah.
What about reciprocity?
Well, were you here? I wasn't here last week. Were you here last week?
Yes, I was.
All right. So what was your conclusion on grace and reciprocity and all that?
My conclusion was I was going to ask you.
I love it. I refer to whatever Doug said. It's got to be right. That's right. I walk in the footsteps of my rabbi.
No, reciprocity would give it to me a connotation that you've not a requirement that but something over and above a free gift.
So Nancy is requesting that I try to move the camera so she can see who's speaking. So let's see, does this?
Don't have to be on camera.
Well, you can lean back and be off, or if you want to be heard. You're welcome. All right, well, let's get into this one. So there is a handout. I think everybody got it. Good. And you may have noticed it's a lengthy handout. So it's on the starts with unit 6 if you're finding the handout online, the powers. And I think this is kind of an interesting discussion. So he talks about the powers in Paul and in the New Testament, and then in the second video we'll talk about what the powers mean in the Old Testament story. So let's go for it.
For the rabbit hole. The principalities and powers in the New Testament and Paul's writings. The rabbit hole is deep. I still haven't found the bottom. But it's immensely illuminating, both personally and in understanding what the apostles are trying to help us see. Let's just start with Ephesians. This is a course on Ephesians. So let's just start. We've already noticed 2 references to the powers. One was I'm looking at the powers handout here. One was in chapter 1, where we first learned about them, that the Messiah's heavenly exaltation and rule is above all other authority, power, and rule, which doesn't just mean heavenly. I mean, all and every, I think means all and every. However, Paul does have his eye specifically on these heavenly powers, how they relate to earthly powers. In chapter 2, we were introduced to the ruler of the authority of the air. In chapter 3, he's going to say that the mere existence of the church doesn't even have to do anything. And the church being the family of Abraham, of reconciled humans who live as one in the Messiah, the mere existence of that group proclaims God's wisdom to the powers. That's what Paul says in chapter 3, verse 10 of Ephesians. He's super excited to say, yeah, the Gentiles are a part of the one family of Abraham. The existence of that family shows the manifold, that's New American Standard, multifaceted, it's like a gem. The multifaceted wisdom of God is made known through the existence of this people to the rulers and the authorities in the heavenlies. So just pause to think through the logic underneath that. So if what this family is people whose identities divide them in the present age, it's what hinders unity, then whatever creates unity is the overcoming of the powers, which means that the powers are the kinds of things that divide people. And we looked at a list in Galatians chapter 3. Gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, slave and free. You can start to put the pieces together here of what he's talking about. It's relevant too, they come up in the climax where he gives the fullest list as he talks about the church putting armor on the divine armor. And we'll talk about the armor of God, so awesome. But the reason we put on these attributes of God himself is that we can stand firm against the schemes of the slanderer. The word devil means slanderer. It's not actually not a name, it's a title. And then he says, listen, our struggle is never against another human. It's other humans who drag you into the arena to throw you to the lions. It's definitely other humans who maybe exclude you from their synagogue or exclude you from worship at the Zeus temple down the street. But please don't mistake them for the actual enemy. They're captive to the powers. The actual enemy are the rulers, the powers, and this unique term, world forces, cosmokratos, the grabbers of the cosmos, those who are grabbing after the cosmos. Spiritual powers of evil in the heavenly places. So these are powers that are actively going to resist the unity and existence of a group of people who don't allow their identity to be defined by what defines them outside of the community. So just Ephesians right there, you get a sense. This is much bigger than an invisible spirit inspiring a greedy thought in my heart or mind. I don't think it excludes that, but it's more than that. That would be my response. So let's go wider into Paul's letters. And here we're to the handout. If you turn to Paul's other letters, I'm at point 3 here, you find out interesting things about the powers, like in Colossians 1. All things were created in him. There's that in him language again. All things were created in the Messiah. Things in heaven and things on earth. Do you see that apocalyptic heaven and earth? Things visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So just let me ask you, when he uses the word powers, does he only mean non-physical entities? No. Clearly not. The powers have both a visible manifestation and an invisible power or dynamic behind them. You can just see it here. I mean, thrones, you know? Call it the Kremlin or the White House or whatever, you know. What he means by throne is actual like thrones. And for him, these are intertwined realities, just like the age to come, right at the moment, is an overlapping heaven and earth reality. When he sees people being brainwashed by religious philosophies of traveling teachers who are trying to make a buck off the latest version of Change Your Life Now or something. He sees the elemental powers of the cosmos. This fits into our category of like religious institutions or religious movements. And of course, he was accused of being one of these, right? I mean, how was the Jesus movement perceived? It was perceived as one of these types of movements. Here's something interesting. Do you know what Jesus did when he died on the cross? He stripped off the armor and weaponry of the rulers and authorities. I'm pretty sure he got killed by them. So, what mindset? What logic? By what logic is Jesus' crucifixion as a rebel criminal by the Romans, his disarming of them, stripping of them of their power, and exposing them to public shame? Do you see how he's inverting the meaning of the cross here? Jesus was the one exposed. No, actually, they were the ones being exposed. The cross was the triumph over the powers. Okay. The cross was also the way that we are rescued from the present evil age. It was a rescue. Because we were enslaved to those powers, which he says were by nature not gods. They're the weak and impoverished elemental powers. So becomes like a detective novel of like, what is he talking? Like what? Let's create the profile that fits all of these descriptions here. And at least none of the inherited categories I had for angels and demons quite fit this. I want to show you a couple other examples. This is going down to page 2. Paul's not the only one who thinks like this, just to show you he's not running solo here. You can turn to the Gospel of John and you find the same earthly, spiritual overlap of the powers. Like John chapter 12. This is Jesus. In chapter 12, he's about to go into the upper room and have the final conversation with the disciples. And he says, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast outside. He's got his eye on the passion, on the cross and the resurrection. Just a few verses later, he uses the same exact word. The same exact word is used to describe the rulers who believed in Jesus. So rulers refers to the chief priests, the military captains, Pilate in Jerusalem. So, some of them believed in Jesus. They're the ones who are going to kill him. And Jesus can describe what they're going to do to him as ultimately empowered by the ruler. It's just that heaven and earth overlap again. Luke, in the same way, right before Jesus is arrested, Jesus says, oh wait, no, this is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus says to the ruling priests and the commanders in the temple, commanders of the temple and the elders, this is your hour and the hour of the authority of darkness. Right, just right there. So all of a sudden, the priesthood and the temple establishment becomes a manifestation of the power of darkness. So this pattern just goes all the way through. Are the powers always evil? No, they're not. You remember what Paul said in Colossians up here? All things were created in him. He's the author of the powers. They were created through him and for him. So apparently the powers represent created entities. How we want to talk about them, we'll keep thinking it through. They're created entities that can serve God's good purpose, or they can go terribly wrong. And they're intimately connected both with a spiritual entity of some kind that's also connected to earthly. We're pretty familiar with how earthly things can be good and go bad. So Paul's got a corresponding category of spiritual entities that are good but that can become bad, when the humans connected to them might be good but become bad. So Romans 13 is a really interesting example where he can talk about the Roman Empire as an authority that is under God's order. I mean, he just straight up, he talks about the Roman Empire. And here he's talking about its positive role, that it can be an enforcer of order and justice in the world and keep chaos and evil at bay. But so this is Paul, right? Who is going to be imprisoned by this power and authority unjustly for like years. So he has some way to think about the powers as not inherently bad, but as easily corrupted, just like humans are made as the image of God, but yet are so easily corrupted. 1 Corinthians 2, this is an important passage to think about Paul's view of the powers. He says, "We, the apostles, speak of a wisdom among those who are mature. It's a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age, who are passing away. Rather, we speak of God's wisdom, the open secret which has been hidden, which God predestined before the ages for our exaltation to glory." Sorry, do you see it right here? It's this right here. That's what he's talking about. So it's a wisdom that none of the rulers of this age understood, because if they had understood it, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. Have you ever read this line? Yeah, I remember. You're like, maybe? I don't know. I've never really thought it through. So the rulers are those who crucified Jesus. So what's he, at least for sure, talking about? Pilate and Caiaphas. What's interesting is he's writing this a decade after Pilate has moved on. Like, he's not in Jerusalem anymore. And he can talk about these rulers as if they're the rulers of the age. Caiaphas is one of the rulers of this age. It seems a little overcooked, you know? And they are passing away. Well, there's still a high priesthood in Jerusalem. And so you can at least on one level, begin to make sense of his language about current rulers who are passing away. That makes perfect sense in light of the now not yet worldview, doesn't it? But this idea that these human rulers can be called the rulers of the age, I mean, maybe the emperor might qualify as one of those, but Caiaphas, he was important, but not cosmically important. Or maybe we need another way to think about this. Okay. So these are the passages that you have to puzzle through and put together a full portrait here. Oh yeah, okay. Here's another example, because it's from a really famous part of Romans chapter 8. This is on page 4. This is the climax of Romans 8. And it's another good example of a symmetrical, he's aligned this whole paragraph in a beautiful symmetrical form. He opens, "Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword?" Who are the source of most of those difficulties? People. People carry swords. People imprison you. People strip you naked. Human powers. Just as it's written, "For your sake we're put to death all the day long. We're considered as sheep to be slaughtered. But in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. For I am convinced," this is Paul's most comprehensive list of the powers, that neither death nor life, neither angels nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, not powers, not height, nor depth. Think, he did the timeline, present or future. Now he's doing the cosmos. Nothing in the heavens, nothing in the earth, height or depth. Not any other creature will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Notice how in the opening and closing line, the love of Christ is synonymous with the love of God. So do you see what he's doing here? He's everything that humans are capable of, and then everything that the cosmic powers are capable of. And look what all the ideas joined in his mind here as the powers. Death, rulers. And notice he has negative and positive. So death and life represent these structures. We would call them, that's weak. We're so modernized. We would call them like a law of nature or something like that. The nature of carbon-based life or something like that. You know, whereas for Paul, these are woven into patterns, more cosmic patterns. Angels, which is in Paul's vocabulary almost always connected to spiritual beings that are loyal to God. Nor rulers, which they can go both ways. Present, things to come, nor the powers. Read a quote from Marcus Barth on the top of page 5. It's an older European scholar. He has real profound insight here. It is probable that Paul means by the principalities and powers those institutions and structures by which earthly matters and invisible realms are administered, and without which no human life is possible. The superior power of nature epitomized by life and death, the ups and downs of historic processes, the nature and impact of favored prototypes, or the catastrophic burdens of the past. I actually don't know what he means, but it sounds impressive. Well, I think I might, but the hope or threat offered to the present by the future. Isn't that an interesting way to put it? In a way, we're captive to the present and limited by not knowing the future. Time is a kind of prison, in one point of view. The might of capitalists, rulers, judges, the benefit and onus of laws, of tradition and custom, the distinction and similarity of political and religious practices, the weight of ideologies, prejudices, the conditions under which all authority, labor, parenthood, etc., thrive or are crushed. These structures and institutions are in Paul's mind. Now, he's writing like a European philosopher right now, but what he captures is, I think, Paul's expansive scope. He's talking about the very nature and structures of our existence on a physical, biological level, but also relational, cultural. God's creation obviously does not consist of earthly visible things alone. Genesis 1:1 treats the creation of the heavens and the earth. So in Colossians 1, invisible things in heaven are added to those that are tangible. In Colossians 1, either both or only the invisible beings are identified with the powers. I think both is a better argument. It's probable that in Ephesians, Paul had in mind at the same time both visible, specific governors and the invisible authority exerted by them. So I should think about this. In a society ordered by law, all it takes for us to honor the authority of someone greater than us is these posting of little signs on the road. And most reasonable people just obey those signs as if they have great power over our behavior. Imagine being an alien looking down. You're like, oh, look, they're all so organized. They just look at that thing. They would mistake the sign as like having power over our minds or something like that, because we all obey what the signs say. Most people do. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, there you go. Here. So, and here's the thing, I'm really happy for the powers when it comes to speed signs. You know, it's like I'm really grateful. I think that's Romans 13. That's awesome. But then, of course, the same powers that create those speed signs can become way corrupted and begin to create structures of order that are dehumanizing, that crush human beings, or that say, you know, some people can flourish around here, but these people can't. And Paul's the powers. That's the powers. If God doesn't recreate people in Messiah Jesus, you are enslaved to these powers. They determine our life, our existence, our desires, our identities. For Paul, it's enslavement to the powers is the human condition apart from the messianic hope. And sin is in the ranks here. Sin and death is a famous kind of duo in the letter to the Romans. Sin can reign like a king, like a power in the book of Romans. So this is Paul's really robust view of the human condition. Again, just to bring it back to our conversation this morning, back to our really simplified and not completely wrong, but not right enough way of thinking of the storyline of the Bible. Paul would have major issues of anybody saying they represent the teaching of Jesus and the apostles who's not talking about the powers. If we're only talking about stupid things that people do that lead them to the bad place. For Paul, this is just, that's like that's like telling somebody who has a fractured arm that they have like a little paper cut. It's just this tip of the iceberg of the real problems at work here. Enslavement to the powers. So do you see that? Okay. And that's not, if thinking of your own context, in terms of teaching or leading other people, it's not hard. You just need 30 minutes and showing people, reading passages. You don't even need Greek. Like this. Paul's got this really robust vision of enslavement to the powers. So where did he get this idea? Like, where did this come from? And this is where the rabbit hole goes the next step, because he did not make this up. This is part and parcel of how Jesus saw the world, and that's because it's how the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament scriptures, present reality in light of the powers.
All right, so there's kind of and he does say this is a rabbit hole, and he's right. But I think it's an interesting one. My big takeaway watching this was that we often talk in the church about like these powers of sin, the power of evil, the power of devil, and from this very like Western individual mindset, that it's all about, what did he say, like an invisible spirit inspiring a greedy thought. Like that's what the powers of evil, the powers of darkness, whatever are. And it's all about us making this individual choice. And I find it fascinating that looking at all of these, like, yeah, that may be part of it, but ultimately, the powers of evil and darkness, and it's also these big systems and corrupt governments and all of these other things that are not just like one individual choice, but it's this world around us that's bigger than, one individual bad choice that I can make. So that was my take on it, but I wonder how you guys heard this.
Yeah, I have to agree. All I heard of is anything that stands between, whether you can see it or not, anything that stands between us and understanding God and His law,
Yeah.
whatever that might be, that stands between us.
Yeah.
I think it's more coming from. I think about my drug addiction. And you have certainly individual choices involved. But you have an alcoholic father in the family. And there's a power that's created there that ensnares not only the family, but the neighbors of the family. The police that have to come and deal with it and carry that home to their families. The violence that happens. It's the drugs that the desire for those creates economic structures that live far beyond the individual peoples that are engaged in it. And those are not, that isn't powers of heaven, that isn't the devil that's doing that. That's people who are empowered by God as co-creators of creation, who are creating creation in a way that is diametrically opposite of anything that God would have. And I think it's a tangible thing. I go to the grocery store, I said this to you before, I go to the grocery store and I can't buy a head of lettuce without wondering, I wonder if there was some economic or even physical enslavement involved in the production of this head of lettuce. How would I know? And am I participating in that? I fish out of the fish case, there's a good chance I am. There's slave fishing trawlers out in the ocean where people are enslaved and held captive on these fishing trawlers. Yeah. And I buy a piece of fish. How do I know? How do I know if I'm involved in that? Chances are I could be, I am. Yeah. It's ensnaring me and I have no clue.
Well, and I think that's a great example that sometimes people can say, well, but I bought organic produce and I bought fair trade coffee and I did this, so I'm good. I'm not part of any of the sin power. A while ago, I read this book, Thanks a Thousand, which was this really, it's a short read, but it was basically this kind of investigation on how, like, he was trying to say thanks to everybody who was part of bringing him his cup of coffee. And so he did the whole like supply chain of everything, including, all the beans and roasting and whatever, but then also like, well, those things have to be carried on roads and in trucks. And somebody has to build those roads and maintain, those trucks, and somebody has to build and design the cup. And like, there's so many processes in it. And he said at one point that like, even the best, even the organic fair trade coffee, at somewhere along that line, there's somebody who is being treated unjustly and not paid fairly. And there's just no way that you can get a cup of coffee that is totally ethical. And that doesn't mean like you shouldn't try, right? You should make the best choices available. But you can't kid ourselves into thinking that we're not a part of bad things going on in the world. We are, whether we like it or
And
not.
it takes a life of its own. It's no longer a production of the people involved. If all the people involved in that just suddenly decided, I'm not going to do anything that's not completely ethical, the system would be still there. It would still be grinding away. It would still be ensnaring people back, the same people that were there who find out, well, I guess, I'm in the middle of Colombia. I can't earn a living any other way. There's no economy in this. I can sit in my hut and starve, but if I want to even just move on the roads, I'm engaged in that.
Yeah.
That's real concrete physical power.
But here's my question with that. Your first part of this, you said, that's not the power of the devil. That's the power of human beings doing that. A lot of Christians would say, no, that is the devil. And that's the devil behind those human beings doing this. And so, and I don't know exactly where I stand on that. And also, what does the devil mean? I mean, and he pointed out that devil and Satan, they're both like titles. The devil means a slanderer, and then Satan means the accuser. And so, yes, there's this cosmic thing, but this like literal horned red guy, like poking people and doing bad. I don't know if it's that, but is there something behind that?
I think you can see it that way, but I think it is more direct to see it as the misappropriation of the powers that God granted the human beings in the Garden of Eden to be co-creators. And the substitution of our judgment as to what is right and what is wrong, as opposed to God's definition of
Original sin. The sin was eating from the tree, eating the fruit of the tree of
The knowledge of good and evil.
knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems like that's behind all this talk of power. We're subject to original sin. I mean, that's one, I don't know if that's that was certainly taught in, as I was growing up in the church. I don't know if that's still a major teaching, but you know, original sin, we're all subject to it. And I think maybe some of these powers that Paul is talking about are original sin.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that original sin is still taught. I think now what I've been taught is that there's this balance of there is both original sin and original blessing, which I mean goes to the whole Luther's saint and sinner thing, right? That they're like, whether you like it or not, we are born part of this sinful fallen world. And we are also part of this creation that God said was good and blessed it. So it's, yeah, so it's both. There is original sin and there's this original blessing that's part of all of it. But yeah, these powers, and he said the powers sometimes are good. Like the traffic laws are a good use of power, right? There's a lot of good distribution and things that happen within power. And there's a lot of bad stuff too. So you see the blessing, you see the sin, both in there.
We take good things and make them bad.
I don't know, but we take some things and make them good too.
Yeah, I don't mean all things that are made.
Yeah.
That good things become bad.
Yeah.
But a lot.
Yeah.
The internet, for instance.
Yeah, that's true. There's some good things on there, and then there's everything. And Janet Schmidt says she's thinking about us while she's watching David Sedaris with her daughter, and we'll watch this later. So I'm sure we're having much more fun than Janet is. Yeah, what do you think?
We're talking about all this and I got lost.
That's
And so the only thing that came out for me, yeah, I listened to the powers, I heard good and evil, I hear all that. There was only one thing that I really keyed in on, was all these things will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is Christ Jesus our Lord. And so the essence of all these bad powers and what have you, they're meaningless because they can't separate us from the love of God.
Yeah.
Did I miss something here?
Well, I don't know if I'd say they're meaningless, but they don't get the last say. They're
Okay,
not all, I don't know how to, but it's, you know, they do matter. I mean, pain and suffering and evil matters. That has meaning to people, but still, that's not the end, right? They don't have the ultimate power, the ultimate authority in the end.
that's what I.
Yeah.
Keep on, it's the love of God. Next back to grace.
Yeah,
And other things, and anyway, that was my thing.
yeah. No, I think that's spot on. What do you think, Don?
Well, I'm with Ron, you know, I got pretty lost.
Yes.
You got one. That's all right. That's okay.
The rabbit.
Well, there's another video, so maybe we'll find it there.
To me, though, there is evil in the world. And I think it's a result of, you know, God giving us choice, you know, we can make a choice. And so some people make bad choices, and, people at different times make good choices and bad choices. And both the good choices and bad choices have consequences. And so when you put enough bad choices or results of bad choices together, and you really have an evil force at work.
Yeah, well, and to use the drug addiction example, sometimes there's bad choices involved in there. But a person that's addicted to drugs and their family, maybe made the wrong choice at some point, but then it's not just them making the wrong choice. It's all these other things working against them too. Which are all those acts of evil combining into something bigger.
Yeah, I mean, like the people who get addicted to drugs, a lot of them will start off with a prescription. They're given, by their doctor, especially before doctors became really aware of how addictive these things were, when drug companies were saying, "Oh, it's fine, it's just like aspirin," and people are in pain and they have a choice. Are they going to, when the prescription runs out, are they going to search for something, or are they going to try to wean themselves off? If they make a bad choice, well then, if they get some pills from a friend or buy some, then pretty soon they are addicted. And then I won't say there's no going back, but it's a very difficult journey to get back to normal. And they'll always be recovering from it.
And then I know some people that refuse to take hardly any pain meds, even with surgery. And it's okay, you can take some for a week. And they're like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to get addicted, because they see where that can lead. And then they're, no, I'll just deal with the pain. And I don't want to get on that path. All right, well, let's watch this Old Testament video. Maybe we can find the rabbit.
Okay.
We'll see. This is just the second half of the handout that I'll follow on here.
In Genesis chapter 1, who's the king and creator of all in Genesis chapter 1? Obviously God. One of the first things that God does in Genesis 1 is exert his creative authority over the darkness to contain it and create its opposite, which is light, which leads to life. So God is the one who separates darkness from light on day 1. But then on day 4, in Genesis 1, God delegates that authority to some other things in his creation. So he appoints the greater light to rule the day. Wait, I thought God rules the day. Yes. But he's choosing to do it now through a creature or a created entity. He creates a lesser light to rule the day. And so now you can say that these lights in the sky rule the day and the night. And that's not a contradiction to God's rulership. It's actually through them that he rules. Now, this is day 4, and it's setting you up for another way that God's going to delegate his rule to the humans, human power. So, and here you go, in the heavens and on the land, God appoints delegated authorities. They're also both of these entities of the skies and the land are called the hosts. The host of heaven, the hosts on the land. You have lots of later Psalms that talk about this, but check out Deuteronomy 4. The Israelites are told, hey, listen, don't lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the sun, the moon, and the stars, the hosts of the heavens, and be led astray and worship and serve them. Let's pause right there. So, do you see, that would be the mistake, is to mistake a created thing for the creator, or attribute ultimate power to one of the powers. That's the glitch in the thinking. And then look at what Moses says here about the sun, moon, and stars. They're the ones whom Yahweh your God has designated for the nations under the heavens. They worship them, but not you. Oh, Okay, well, what do you do with that one? Is that a surprise that other people worship the sun, moon, and stars? That's actually a pretty universal phenomenon in a lot of human history. So Israel is presented as a people group who are being chosen to be out from under the authority of those powers and under the direct power and authority of the Creator. In fact, Moses says as much in Deuteronomy 32. Moses says, hey, Israelites, remember the days of old. Consider the years past. Ask your dad. He'll give you wisdom. Ask your elders, and they'll tell you. Not so much in America, but in most sane cultures, in most of human history, this is how things work. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided up humanity. So let's pause right there. He's recalling something from earlier in the Torah. When did God assign people where they live and divide up? Can you think of that biblical story or passage? It's Babylon. Yeah. And then Genesis 10, the table of 70 nations, their languages, where they live. So the dividing up of the nations is under God's authority, but the scattering happened. It was God's response to an act of rebellion, wasn't it? An act of rebellion and of earthly powers that want to ascend to the heavens by making their own tower. So Babylon itself is a moment of the powers trying to ascend back to the place where they've been exiled from, where heaven and earth overlap. And so this scattering is one of these merciful acts of judgment, just like the exile from the garden. So remember that story when he gave the nations their inheritance. He divided humanity. He fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Oh, well, that's interesting. Who are the sons of God? In Hebrew, you can say the phrase sons of or also daughters of, and you're not talking about like birth parents or birth descendants. It's a phrase. It means members of X class. An easy one is Elijah and Elisha had a crew always following them around. Remember what they're called? Sons of the prophets. Yeah. Elijah and Elisha did not have hundreds of kids. It's their disciples, prophets in training, people who are also in the class of prophet. So our phrase, sons of Elohim, Elohim is the Hebrew word for spiritual being. So these are spiritual beings. That's what they are. They're spiritual beings. Do I have a category for spiritual beings who have been delegated to rule? Yes, they're called the hosts of heaven. And I was given real concrete examples of them in Genesis 1, the sun, moon, and stars. And I know that that can go wrong because those beings can begin to attract worship that detracts from the honor to the Creator. And so what Moses is saying here is that when God scattered the nations at Babylon, he handed them over, so to speak, to the powers. But he chose, predestined, all that language, he chose one particular family that he was going to rule over directly to begin the new humanity project. And he calls this, the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage. Is this striking you as pretty significant for understanding the biblical storyline? Like, this is super significant. So, in other words, the narrative in Genesis is 10 verses about Babylon. What you're going to come across is moments in the biblical story that keep filling out what exactly happened at Babylon. And this is one of them. There are rebel spiritual beings who didn't remain loyal to God, just like there are rebel humans who don't remain loyal to God. And here's what's hard for me still, is that these are beings in a way that is different from how I am a being. I'm, the sun, moon, and stars. I'm not a burning plasma ball in outer space, but I'm also not whatever authority a stop sign has over us all, that's an entity, a created entity that exists in relation to human beings, but is not a human being. Like, where's the human being who represents the authority of the stop sign? It's another kind of created entity, isn't it? And it seems to me this is what Paul's getting at. The powers can cover lots of different things. It can cover a spiritual being who is like unto me, like a personal type of being, and he reserves the language of the accuser, the devil, or the Satan, or the language of the demons, lesser spiritual beings. But he can also use the powers to refer to what we would say are abstract entities. But for him, they're all a part of one package deal. So in a polytheistic culture, think of what the gods are. They're what Westerners call nature. Sun, moon, stars, fertility, the power of fertility, sex gods. The power, and fertility gods aren't just created to humans, but the fertility of your flocks, the fertility, rivers, sources of life, war, military valor. There was the Roman goddess Roma, the power of the state, deified as a goddess. And the statues of these Roman gods look exactly like the statues that you see when you go into modern capitals here today. And we give them abstract names: justice, liberty. There's not a lot of difference between us and people 2,000 years ago, except we maybe don't slaughter chickens. Some people don't slaughter chickens to them, but instead we just slaughter each other. There's very little difference between us and the people that Paul was writing to. We just think we're more sophisticated. The powers, that's what we're talking about here. Let me just throw one other example at you, and then we'll process. In the story of the this is good. In the story of the Exodus, Moses, Pharaoh, right, Egypt, let my people go. Who's the bad guy? Who's the bad guy? Pharaoh. Very clearly in the foreground as the bad guy. In the Passover, the first description of Passover, this is Exodus chapter 12, verse 12. God tells Moses, I'm going to pass through the land of Egypt that night and strike all the firstborn of Egypt, human and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute acts of judgment. Who is being struck by the 10th plague? The human powers and the spiritual powers. They're not different. And what this line, for sure, being revealed in the 10th plague, is it makes you go back and think through all of the earlier plagues in Egypt. Here, this one's for free. Chapter 10, verse 21, the plague of darkness. The Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky and let there be darkness. Let there be darkness. Does this ring any bells? Yes, it's the exact reversal of Genesis 1:3. Let there be light. Let there be darkness. Whom did God appoint to rule on his behalf over the darkness and the light? The powers. The powers. So God's exerting his influence, his authority and influence over the rebel powers. So who's the chief god of the Egyptian pantheon? It's Ra, the sun god. So this is all connected. The gods of the powers of Egypt are being judged as he brings down the human powers of Egypt. It's always two-sided, for Paul. So we could spend a lot more time. The handout goes into a lot more detail, but I think you at least get the gist of the picture here. And so this is why, for Paul, when the one family of Abraham is freed from slavery to the powers, It creates a humanity in which there is no, think of it, no male or female, no slave or free, no Scythian, barbarian, Greek, or Jew. I mean, he's covering the whole class there. Peoples whose identities and destinies are not governed by the powers. Nothing can separate us from the love of the Messiah. Even if they kill you, all they can do is kill you. And that will be you participating in the triumph over the powers, because all they can do is kill you. Where, of course, the actual ruling king has power over life and death itself. Okay, I still, this is remarkable to me. I still am reckoning with the fact that I've been following Jesus for like almost 20 years, and this is just now becoming clear to me. But this is a version of the biblical story that is simultaneously spiritual and political and social. It just, really, it's just saying all of those things are one. But I think it makes sense of why Paul says the things that he says. And all the way back to Lauren's question, great question from this morning, talk about a diagnosis of the human condition that can speak to any culture, any age, in the present. And that gives God's people leverage to both be a source of good, but also be a prophetic voice to expose the corruption of the powers.
All right, everything clear now? Good. So I wonder what everyone thought of his statement that there's not a lot of difference between the ancient people that Paul was writing to and the people today. We just think we're more sophisticated. I wonder, do you think that's true or not?
Definitely.
Human nature is not changed since the creation.
Yeah, I think it's such a, I mean, because the way we often think about, all right, there was different, pantheism, and we're worshiping all these different gods, and then now, okay, but there's a lot of people that are just monotheists, so now we're good. And then thinking of like, yeah, but actually, practically, the way that we build our society maybe isn't as different as we thought it was. Because that's still like, oh, technically, there's a lot more Christians than there were then, so now we're good. But actually, does that make a difference in how the powers of the world run or not?
I don't know, an awful lot of bad things have happened in the name of Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, in the name of religion.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, all religions.
Yeah, not just Christianity.
Right now.
Yeah. Oh, I also wrote down something that this just made pop in my head, that the idea of these like powers and demons as outside forces, sometimes I think that can be helpful. And I've heard it with people in the like eating disorder community, that sometimes talking about their disorder as this outside thing is a common practice. And for whatever, like they talk about it like, not like my problem with this, not, it's like, oh, it's this thing that has this power, and like it's winning today. And it's like I keep fighting against it. Which is, normally I'm kind of like, let's think of demons as metaphorical and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know.
You could say that about alcohol.
Yeah.
Alcohol is a problem. Alcoholism, whatever sickness.
Yeah.
How that develops, and there's other genetic illnesses that people have. I don't know if that's what you would drive.
Yeah. But I just think sometimes it's helpful to have something that's not just my choices that is forming me. It's like, let's call it a demon, let's call it or whatever. There's something else that is acting against me that I can think of, like, it's helpful to think of it that way. I'm fighting against this thing instead of just myself. I don't know.
Probably harder to fight against yourself.
Yeah.
than it's another thing.
Nancy says, I think my brain is fried. I think you're not the only one, Nancy. Interesting to think that we make gods of justice, liberty, military valor, etc. So thinking of like the US government, we do that. Is that what you're getting at, Nancy? Seems so. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought. And then the other thing that I just found, I had never thought about this before, was in Genesis, the like sun and the moon giving authority to like rule over stuff. I just think that's so fascinating to me that God's like, you are the ruler of the day and the ruler of the night. Like, what? It's a star. It's a, like, how does that work? But I just think like including those in the powers of this world to me is just, I just never thought about that. Any other insights? Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say that was their understanding of
Yeah.
nature at that time. They thought the earth was flat too.
Yeah. Right. True.
They didn't know about the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Being a big ball. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
But anyhow, that their understanding, that's what was written is based on their understanding of the natural world. I mean, based on that writing, we haven't been around any more than 5,000 years. And some people believe that based on the writing.
Despite all the other. Evidence. Yeah.
Our knowledge that has been gained over the centuries and millennia.
Which I've always thought of as like God meeting the people where we are in our understanding. And at the time, like for God to just say, all right, it's a round thing, here's how it works, it would have just been too much. So it's like, all right, here's your worldview, let's work with that. And now your worldview is different, let's work with that.
Yeah, it's only been a little over 500 years that we knew the earth was round.
Yeah. Yeah, which is wild when you think about it.
Yeah, when you think of it, when you put it like that.
Yeah.
But the amount of time humans have been, I mean, they did look at the stars, but they just thought it was, like a dome.
Yeah, poke some little holes.
In some dome.
Yeah.
Pictures.
Yeah.
Their understanding of power would have been different than our understanding of power.
Right.
Even 2,000 years ago, the Romans, I mean, they, even all thought the world was flat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he had no reason to think otherwise, right?
So the difference is only what humans have been able to understand over time through their own curiosity. It hasn't changed their nature, but they understand the world, they understand some powers differently.
Right.
They don't act any differently, but they
Right. Yeah, I love his thing of like, we don't slaughter chickens anymore. We just slaughter each other. We still do that. All right, let's pray. Our brains are fine. Let's get out of here. God, we thank you for getting to think some more about the powers of this world and help us to remember in the face of some horrible things and some things that are or aren't or feel out of our control, that it's ultimately you who has the authority over all of this, even the authority over life and death. And so help us to be people who follow you, who love you and spread your love in the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.